Hello everyone, welcome to Facebook Live and Twitter Live. I believe we're all on that. Okay, today we have internationally recognized artist, speaker, and author Phil Hansen. As you know, I don't have to tell you, but for those folks out there, Phil has been featured on the Grammy Awards, Disney, Mazda, Rockefeller Foundation, and the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. What is that about, first of all?
That was a random one. So I did a project a few years back where I painted a picture with French fries. So using French fries on butcher paper, rubbing the fries made the paper transparent. So I was able to draw a picture with the French fries, and they reached out and they wanted a huge picture for a location, I think somewhere in DC, and they wanted to use hamburger grease and make the giant portraits of Bill and Hillary Clinton. And I said, okay.
You're in.
Yeah. Random but fun.
You've been on TED Talk, the main stage, and I understand it has over 2 million views.
Yeah.
And it keeps rising. So we're next shooting for 3 million and beyond, right? So
it's fun to see it moving.
Yeah, but it's amazing how that presentation still resonates with so many people. I mean, we get calls from people all over from many industries, and we ask how they learned about you, and that is still it still resonates with them. A lot of people have seen you.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to ultimately the story. It's a message of somebody overcoming a challenge in life, and being able to take that story and I told it in a way where, of course, I was sharing my story, but then at the same time making those connections where, here's my story, but then it's kind of everywhere.
Right.
I mean, I faced a limitation in my life, but then limitations are everything from interpersonal relationships to challenges at work to kind of everything we face. And so it's really that nice message of being able to overcome and get creative with any sort of limitation and challenge that we face. And I think that's why it was able to spread so well as a TED Talk.
Speaking of that, briefly, what was the limitation that you personally had to overcome? And oddly enough, a phrase of all things that kind of propel you into really what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I wanted to be an artist kind of for years, all through high school. Then I went off to art college, but all that time I was really interested in an artistic technique called pointillism, where it's just using millions of little tiny dots to make pictures. But then what would happen is occasionally, all of our hands, our hands will shake naturally if we're stressed, if we've had too much caffeine, those kinds of things.
Which I have.
and in some situations it's fine, it doesn't really matter. But for me, trying to do pointillism, getting all those dots perfectly placed into all the right spot, when my hand would shake, it was an issue. And so I would end up holding the pen really tight to try and keep it as steady as I could. But then what happened is when I would hold the pen tight, that would cause fatigue in my arm, which would lead to more shaking. And it was just this cycle, that action of holding the pen so tight, that eventually caused my hand to shake constantly. And then I dropped out of art school. I was away from art for a while, and then I ended up going back to, I got interested again in art and went to a neurologist, and the neurologist diagnosed me with permanent nerve damage. And ultimately it's shaking my hand. It's not as severe as other diagnoses he's probably made. And so when I was sitting there in the doctor's office, he's kind of watching me. He's like, well, why don't you just embrace the shake? And I was like, that's not a very nice thing to say. It was kind of a raw moment. And he's like, yeah, it's all right. You're going to be okay. And it wasn't the advice I wanted to hear, but it was ultimately that advice of embrace the limitation that you're faced with. And I ignored him for a while, but then when I found my way back to art and back to creativity, what I found is that working with that limitation, because now I could no longer do the fine detailed art that I wanted to do, but working with that was what allowed me to really push my creativity, because then I started to see limitations as a method of actually being more creative. So then that's when I started to actually intentionally limit myself and try to find more creativity within that.
Well, what I love is that, you tend to find art out of so many different mediums, materials. And I got to say, from the outside looking in, watching a lot of your YouTube videos, which you've done documenting the art, it is just amazing. Everything from matchsticks, making Jimi Hendrix and letting them burn away. I think that was part of your Goodbye Art series. and to the burger grease of making Mona Lisa, karate chops of Bruce Lee.
I used a typewriter recently.
Yeah, the typewriter with the
Yeah,
poets. Yeah,
yeah.
What was behind that? That I mean, it was so fascinating to.
Yeah, so I used a typewriter, and I designed little tiny pictures that what I was typing out in the typewriter was actually poems. But then when so the poem read across, but then it actually created a portrait of the person who wrote the poem, and that all stemmed from. I feel like there's so oftentimes in life, and actually before we sat down, you had mentioned this movie quote that popped to mind.
Yeah.
And how it went straight to the actor, and I
Right.
love how those words and different things in our lives can really stick with us, and how they attach people to us, and that
Right.
some of that stickiness and that connectivity. And I wanted to find a way to take that element and bring it into my art.
Right.
And so I was thinking about words and poems and different bits and pieces that when I think of certain phrases, they connect to other people for me. And so from there, then that's where I branched into these artworks that connected the poem to the author.
Recently, you and I were talking about just reasons why organizations, many different types of industries. I mean, everything from banking, financial, healthcare groups, manufacturing groups. I mean, the list goes on and on. The type of industries that bring you into their conferences and conventions to present. Talk a little bit about maybe some of the reasons you hear, like why they're bringing you in.
I'd say the top three are change within the company, some sort of industry shift that's causing limitations and challenges kind of for everybody.
Right.
And then also oftentimes people look for me to come in because they want ultimately a motivational, inspirational speaker, but within that they also want somebody who's different
Right.
than what they've had before. And with an art background, I definitely bring a different air to what you would often see on stage, and I try to make it connected and engaging. So there's different elements that I hand out to the
true.
audience, and so everybody gets to engage with something. They get to touch some art, and that's kind of a fun element. But within the change within the company, if there's maybe a new CEO or a new kind of big shift, maybe
Right.
there's a huge layoff, or there's maybe a layoff and then a new huge round of hiring.
Yeah.
So there's just lots of fluctuation. That's what often people will reach out and want me to come in because, again, my story is about limitations, but it's also creativity and finding that resourcefulness on the inside during those times of challenge.
Well, it leads me to think about everyone has issues, and we say, I can't because of, and this is just in the business world, budgets, people power, maybe not enough, we can't take on another project, or, there's so many reasons of on and on and of I can't. How do you address that in your presentation?
Yeah, so that is really, so this whole experience, when I, got creative with my limitation, then it changed my life and I went and gave a TED Talk. That's the story that I share, but what happened after that was weird because people would then ask me, how can I do what you did? And I said, I don't know. I had no idea because it had happened kind of fluidly and naturally in my life, but I didn't know if there were any steps for people to be able to transform their own limitation. But then that sent me, I guess, on a bit of a personal quest to try to figure out what was at the root of limitations and how is transformation possible. And within that, what I found, and I did a huge art project, talked with over 1,000 people. I put my phone number online, which is not for the faint of heart, but I put my phone number online and asked people to share stories about limitations.
Right.
And so from there, I spoke with tons of people, and I really got to the root of what I believe is the struggle with limitations, is that when we face a challenge, so oftentimes we see the challenge, and we talk about the constraint, we talk about the limitation, but all of our challenges are actually composed of two parts. And the limitation, that's the thing that we always talk about, but the other part of it is actually what I call a self-limiting belief. And for me, that was the thing that ultimately I transformed, because I still have the shake, it still affects me in my work, but what really ultimately changed was this belief, because for a long time I believed that if my hand shakes, I can't make art. And that was the belief.
Right.
And that belief is what caused me to stop and not being able to move forward.
Right.
So what I began to do is I began to look at that. I began to kind of try to hold the limitation and this self-limiting belief separately. And I ignored the belief, this idea that I couldn't make art.
Right.
And I just asked myself, how can I make art with a shaking hand? And so I addressed the limitation in a different way. And it's that shift, that is where I think that true secret to transformation is.
Right.
Is that when we can begin to look at our limitations kind of in isolation of the beliefs, then these can'ts, it won't work this way because, or, we can't get it done this way because.
Right.
Those are mostly beliefs. Then we have to look at just the limitation. And we will look at just the limitation without these expectations and ideas of how things work. That's where innovation really can come in, our creativity. That's where transformation is.
One of the best components that I love about what you also bring to organizations for conferences, conventions, and not only the keynote, in addition, you offer this collaboration art experience, which I think is totally fantastic. Not only have I seen it in person, and it's fun to just experience, and I think it's really important for groups these days. I tend to hear that they want kind of in sessions, they're looking for experiences at times. But can you talk a little bit about this, the collaboration art experience? And then the second part is some of the value behind it.
Yeah, and so this experience, of course, as you said, people are often looking for something different. They're looking for experiential. They're looking for somebody to come in and not just stand on a stage and talk. They want something that they can touch and interact with. And that's what I've tried to do that with my speech, but then the next level is, and I was just yesterday working with a group of 350 people. And so what we do is I'll bring in all these supplies, we'll hand it out to the entire audience. And then at basically I'll give my presentation, and after my presentation we segue into now the audience gets to create their art. And I'll walk them through exercises depending on the size of the audience. There's two different types of art experiences. And then if it's whatever it is, I'll walk them through these exercises, and at the end they have their own little artworks. But those little artworks then become part of a larger picture. And so all these little bits and pieces get put together for this bigger image. And what becomes the element that becomes not just visually fun, but also for connecting to why we're creating this with an audience, is because of is this experience that when we're in our daily lives, when we're at work from day to day, it's harder to see that bigger picture, that 5-year view, that 30,000 foot view, whatever it is. Those become that becomes the beautiful metaphor for this kind of art, because when you're close to a work that's made of dots or fragments, it's a very different experience than when you're far away from it. And so that close and far away then I feel represents a lot of aspects of life, and how those little bits and pieces in life can add up to the life that we've made.
And there's a lot of collaboration that goes into teamwork and collaboration when people are making those as well, right? That becomes in some ways a team. I'll say, well, it is a little team building in a sense, but
absolutely.
It really is, right?
Because then what happens is at the end you have this one huge artwork that everybody can find their piece. And maybe sometimes people, if somebody's doing an amazing job, but then somebody a few rows down isn't doing maybe as good of a job. And you can see all these pieces and they blend together and they create this almost quilted patchwork of an image. And that's really a lot of the beauty, is that even if we if it's whether it's fingerprints for one of the artistic things, or if it's using this mosaic technique I developed, whatever it is, it all adds up to end up creating that end image. In
the end image, and when you do the reveal, is again, I've been part of witnessing this and seeing the audience. Their face is just astonished by what they really you've helped guide them to create, and the final images are just amazing. And I think it also correlates to in an industry, in a company, all the small pieces that work together to create that product, the service, the value of a company. So I think there's so many connections that that work that you do.
Yeah. Well, and I can say
absolutely.
Also that I feel like with art, that's one of the kind of beautiful things, is that art can be whatever we want it to be. When an artist makes something, they may have one intention and one idea behind it, but then as other people look at it, they can put their own meaning onto it. And so that's one of the beautiful things about creating this kind of artwork, is that it can be, as we talk about it, we can have our own ideas, but if we want to share with other people, we can adjust those to be able to be flexible and bring in other people.
It invites a conversation while they're creating it, And then also after they've created it.
Yeah, because what's so fun is then people, as they're finishing up whatever pieces they're
Right.
working on, that I always ask them to take a picture of it, and then later on they can, when they come up to the big piece, they can actually then look at their phone and find the
Find their
picture,
piece, yeah.
and then begin to look for their
Right.
pieces, and it's fun to see people just sit there and spend an hour and a half in front of it hunting.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
when they find it, they get so excited.
Well, Phil, we really appreciate you coming by, stopping in our South Orange,
Yeah.
New Jersey office.
Great to be here.
And thank you very much, everyone live, for joining us. If you want to learn more about Phil, visit eaglestalent.com. Have a great day.